February 1968. Hughes City inside the Citadel. Delta Company, 1st Battalion, 5th Marines, is pinned at an intersection. An entire NVA platoon has fortified a two-story building 50 m ahead. Multiple machine guns, RPGs. The Marines have been stuck here for 20 minutes getting murdered. They cannot advance. They cannot retreat. Every attempt to move draws fire that tears men apart. A tracked vehicle rolls forward. 9 tons, 6 rifles mounted in pairs. The crew traverses the guns toward the building. 150 caliber tracer flies through a second-story window. A white puff of smoke marks where it hits the interior wall. The NVA abandon the building. Scatter through rear exits. Flee. The vehicle never fires its main guns. A single tracer round was enough. The enemy had learned what was coming next. I Corps Tactical Zone. The northernmost military region of South Vietnam. 1965 to 68. This was where the jungle met the fortress cities, where the Marines faced an enemy that refused to play by the rules they expected. The North Vietnamese Army and Viet Cong fought from prepared positions. Fortified bunkers layered with logs and sandbags, trench systems zigzagging through rice paddies, hardened buildings with walls 3 feet thick, colonial-era masonry that had stood for 100 years, spider holes that appeared and disappeared. And when the Tet Offensive exploded across South Vietnam in January of 1968, the ancient city of Hoa, with its 18th-century walled citadel and population of 140,000 civilians, became a fortress the Marines had to take room by room, wall by wall, building by building. The Marines had weapons. They had the M72 Leo W, the light anti-tank weapon. Disposable rocket launcher, 66 mm warhead. It was designed to punch through tank armor. February 1968, inside Hughes City, Marines fired law after law at those thick colonial walls. The rounds ricocheted. The stone was too dense, the mortar too old and too strong. The walls stood. The NVA kept firing from the windows. They had M48A3 patent tanks, 50 tons of steel and firepower, 90 mm main gun that could destroy anything it could hit. But 50 tons meant the patents were too heavy for most Vietnamese bridges, too wide for the narrow streets of Hughes' ancient neighborhoods, restricted to the main roads where the NVA knew exactly where they would appear. Corporal Mario Tame commanded a patent tank at Hughes 9 days inside the Citadel. His tank took over 120 hits from RPGs and B-40 rockets. The tank survived, but it could barely move. And in the tight urban terrain where the Marines were dying, the patents couldn't maneuver to where they were needed most. Standard infantry weapons, M16 rifles, M79 grenade launchers, were designed for different fighting. They were inadequate against bunkers reinforced with railroad ties and sandbags against buildings that had walls designed to stop cannon fire from centuries past. Artillery could work, but artillery took time. You call the fire mission. You wait for clearance. The rounds arrive minutes later, if the rules of engagement allow it at all. In a city packed with civilians, with the imperial palace and centuries of cultural heritage at stake, artillery was restricted. Early in the battle, it was barely used at all. February 1st and 2nd, 1968. Captain Ron Christmas, Company H, 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines, led the 1st Marine convoy into Hughes. 2 Ontos, 2 Army trucks mounting quad 50 caliber machine guns, and his infantry. They took heavy fire, crossing into the city. The NVA hit them from windows, from rooftops, from fortified positions the Marines couldn't see until muzzle flashes gave them away. Artillery would take minutes and risk killing civilians. The Ontos provided instant suppression. Direct fire right now. The convoy pushed through. February 3rd through 5th, Lieutenant Colonel Ernest Cheatham, commander of 2nd Battalion 5th Marines, advanced his men toward the provincial headquarters in southern Hughes. His Marines tried advancing through the streets. NVA crossfire turned those streets into kill zones. Machine guns firing from second-story windows. RPGs launched from doorways. The thick walls provided perfect cover. The Marines tried forcing doors. Men died under fire before they could breach. Law rockets bounced off walls. Calling airstrikes in an ancient city was politically impossible. 140,000 civilians, the cultural heart of Vietnam. 38 Marines killed, 320 wounded. That was the cost of clearing just the southern half of Hughes between February 1st and 10th, Multiple intersections where Marines were pinned down, stuck, taking casualties, unable to advance, and unable to retreat. The problem was simple and brutal. Infantry needed something that could roll up to a fortified position and destroy it immediately. Not in minutes, not after calling for support. Now, the Marines needed a weapon that combined the firepower of a tank with the agility to navigate urban terrain. Something light enough to cross weak bridges and move through narrow streets. Something with the punch to breach fortress walls. Something fast enough to respond the instant it was needed. What they got was a farm machinery company's answer to Soviet armor in Europe, repurposed into something its designers never imagined. Leoport, Indiana, 1950. The Alice Chalmers Manufacturing Company made tractors, farm equipment, combined harvesters, industrial machinery. They did not make weapons. But in November 1950, as the Korean War revealed that American infantry needed mobile anti-tank firepower they could airlift into combat, the U.S. Army Ordnance Department came calling. The contract went to the Farm Equipment Division, a team of up to 50 engineers. They had 2 weeks to complete the design. 2 weeks. Most weapons programs take years. The engineers worked around the clock. The project was classified confidential. A section of the Leoport Agricultural Assembly Plant was walled off, isolated from the rest of the facility. While one half of the plant built tractors, the other half built a tank destroyer. Testing happened on weekends when the plant was empty. Nobody could know what was being developed behind those walls. At the same time, across the country, scientists at Caltech were working on a classified study called Project Vista. 1951. The Korean War was proving that Soviet armor could overwhelm infantry positions through sheer numbers. The Vista scientists envisioned a new kind of defense. Large numbers of small, lightweight vehicles armed with recoilless rifles deployed in massive quantities across the European plains. They would swarm Soviet tank columns. The name came from Greek ontos, meaning thing or being the existing thing. The vehicle that exists in the moment of contact. By the end of 1951, the two projects merged. The Army's Infantry Assault Vehicle and Project Vista's Ontos became one program. The concept was elegant in its brutality. Mount 6 M4A1C recoilless rifles on a light, tracked chassis. The M40 was designated 106 mm, actually 105 mm caliber, but designated 106 to prevent ammunition confusion with the older M27 recoilless rifle. Each gun could fire armor-piercing rounds capable of penetrating any tank then in existence. 6 guns meant devastating first-strike capability. Ripple fire all 6 barrels, and the target ceased to exist. Recoilless rifles solved the weight problem. A conventional tank gun produces massive recoil that has to be absorbed by the vehicle's suspension and structure. That means weight, armor, a heavy chassis. The recoilless rifle vents propellant gases backward through a venturi, the backblast, no recoil to absorb, no need for a heavy vehicle. The Ontos could be 9 tons instead of 50. The trade-off was brutal for the crew. Reloading had to happen externally. The crew had to dismount, expose themselves completely, and manhandle 38 pounds rounds into the breech of each rifle. 6 guns, 228 pounds of ammunition to reload fully under fire. Armor was minimal, 13 mm on the hull, sloped for deflection, 6.5 mm on the underside, 3/16 of an inch, barely enough to stop small arms fire. RPGs and recoilless rifles could penetrate easily. The doctrine was simple. Shoot first from concealment, kill the target, then displace before the enemy could return fire. It wasn't designed to take hits. It was designed to deliver them. 1952, the first prototype rolled out of Leoport based on the running gear of the M56 Scorpion light tank. 1953, the Army evaluated it, and the Army said no. The crew compartment was too cramped. The loader sat in what crews would later call a cubby hole, barely enough room to move. External reloading exposed the crew to enemy fire. The thin armor meant any return fire could penetrate. Limited ammunition, 18 rounds total, 6 loaded and 12 in internal racks, meant the vehicle would run dry quickly in sustained combat. The Marine Corps looked at what the Army rejected, and the Marines said yes. They were desperate for organic anti-tank capability, something they could deploy without depending on Army armor support. Something light enough to accompany amphibious assaults. The Ontos was flawed, but it was mobile, It was devastating, and it was available. 1955, the T-165E2 prototype was standardized as the M50 Ontos. October 1956, the first M50s were fielded by the Marine Corps. Production ran from 1955 through 57. 297 units built. The original plan called for 1,000. The program was being canceled before it was even complete. By the time production ended, the Ontos was already considered obsolescent. 1963 to 65. The Marines upgraded 176 units to M50A1 standard. Chrysler 361 BV8 engine replaced the original inline 6. More horsepower, solid-state radio, an azimuth indicator so the crew could actually know which direction the guns were pointing. Small improvements, but the fundamental design remained. 6 rifles, thin armor, external reloading. The weapon carried 450 caliber spotting rifles mounted on 4 of the main guns. These were bat rifles, ballistic accuracy test. They fired tracer rounds that produced a visible puff of white smoke on impact. Accurate to 1,500 yards. The crew would fire the spotting rifle first, watch where the tracer hit, adjust, then fire the main gun. In theory, Aberdeen Proving Ground ran tests before the Ontos was fielded. They fired all 6 rifles simultaneously. The back blast shattered windows in nearby buildings, knocked bricks loose from walls. The blast swept the street clean of dust, rocks, loose debris. All of it turned into shrapnel that could kill anyone standing too close. Marines would learn quickly. When an Ontos rolls into firing position, you take cover. The weapon is as dangerous behind it as it is in front. It was designed as a tank destroyer for European planes. A weapon to kill Soviet armor in open terrain, but Vietnam changed everything. The NVA didn't field massed tank columns. They fought from bunkers and fortified villages. The Ontos' lightweight 9-tonons combat-loaded 13 tons for the M50A1 became an advantage instead of a liability. It could go where patent tanks couldn't. Narrow alleyways, weak bridges, cramped village streets, rice paddies that would bog heavier vehicles. The devastating firepower designed to crack open tanks proved perfect for cracking open bunkers. 106 mm high explosive plastic rounds, HP, also called HESH for high explosive squash head, could punch 4 square meter holes in masonry walls at 300 to 500 yards range or demolish them entirely. The Ontos became an urban assault gun, a building buster, a wall breacher, the weapon the Marines didn't know they needed. And then there was the M581 Beehive round developed in 1957 by Whirlpool Corporation under contract with Picatinny Arsenal anti-personnel ammunition. Each round contained 9,600 steel fleches. 2 inches winged darts compartmentalized and stacked inside the casing like a traditional conical beehive. That's where the name came from. The flechettes could be released by mechanical time fuse or as canister. A 6-gun salvo launched approximately 57,600 fleches, functioning like the largest shotgun ever mounted on a vehicle. The fleches produced a distinctive buzzing sound in flight. Veterans would remember that sound for the rest of their lives. The buzzing became a psychological weapon. When you heard it, you knew what was coming, and what was coming killed everything in its path. By 1965, the Ontos was already obsolete. But the Marines formed anti-tank battalions anyway. 1st Anti-Tank Battalion, 1st Marine Division, 3rd Anti-Tank Battalion, 3rd Marine Division. Each battalion organized 45 TOS into 3 companies, 15 vehicles per company, 3 platoon of 5 Ontos each. The crews weren't specialists. There was no military occupational specialty for Ontos crews. No formal training pipeline. They were riflemen pulled from Marine infantry battalions and taught to drive, shoot, and maintain a vehicle the Army had already rejected. They learned on the job in combat under fire. President John F. Kennedy allegedly saw an Ontos during a military demonstration. He called it a weird little bugger. The president was more right than he knew. Weird, obsolete, rejected by the Army, thrown together by farm equipment engineers in 2 weeks. It shouldn't have worked. In August 1965, the Ontos rolled into combat for the first time. August 18, 1965. Van Tuong Village Complex, Quang Ngai Province, south of Chulai. Operation Starlight. the first major offensive operation conducted entirely by United States forces in the Vietnam War. A platoon of 4 Ontos from 3rd Anti-Tank Battalion rolled off landing craft utility vessels onto Green Beach at 7:30 that morning. They were attached to 3rd Battalion, 3rd Marines. Nobody knew yet what this weapon could really do. Later that day, a Marine armored column pushed inland from the beach. An M48 Patent tank took recoilless rifle fire from Viet Cong positions hidden in the village Trien. The column halted. Mortar rounds started dropping. Small arms fire raked the exposed Marines. 5 killed, 17 wounded. The column was pinned. The Ontos maneuvered forward. They provided frontal fire into the tree line and flank protection for the stalled column. Direct fire. Immediate suppression. The enemy fire subsided. The column moved again. Company H, 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines advanced into open rice paddies between Nam Yen and An Yuang. That afternoon, 5 tanks and 3 Ontos augmented the infantry. The VC caught them in crossfire from prepared positions. The Ontos traversed their guns and fired. The farm tractor chassis that everyone had mocked proved its worth. The tracked vehicle designed for cross-country mobility in Europe worked in Vietnamese rice paddies, worked on beaches, worked in village approaches where heavier vehicles bogged down. First blood, first proof. The Ontos could fight. The sound was distinctive. Not the sharp crack of a tank's main gun. A deeper concussive blast. Whump. The hollow report of a recoilless rifle multiplied by 6, followed immediately by the whoosh of back blast gases venting rearward. 6 muzzle flashes simultaneously. 6 back blast plumes sweeping the ground behind the vehicle, and the target bunker tree and fortified hut disintegrating under the impact. Captain Dale Dye would later write about watching Ontos operations at Hue and Quezon. He described the back blast. Those of us peeping from cover during this performance had long ago learned to duck and cover when Ontos rolled up into the action. The back blast from one or more of the 106s mounted on the sides of Ontos swept the streets of dust, rocks, and debris, which became deadly shrapnel. The weapon was dangerous to everyone nearby, friend and enemy alike. May 1967, Operation Hickory north of Kien, near the demilitarized zone in Quang Tri Province. 2nd Battalion, 9th Marines, and 2nd Battalion, 26th Marines pushed into NVA territory. The North Vietnamese had prepared the ground, bunkers reinforced with logs, trench systems connecting firing positions, interlocking fields of fire the NVA intended to hold. The Marines brought Ontos, and this time the Ontos carried M581 Beehive anti-personnel rounds. This was the first large-scale combat use of the flechette ammunition. Each round contained 9,600 steel flechettes, 2 in long, winged darts. A 6-gun salvo launched 57,600 projectiles. The effect was devastating. The Ontos functioned like a massive shotgun. Volume of fire replaced precision. The flechettes didn't need to hit a specific target. They saturated an area. Everything in the kill zone ceased to exist. The flechettes produced a distinctive sound in flight. A buzzing like a swarm of hornets magnified 1,000 times. The sound carried. The NVA heard it coming. That buzzing would haunt their nightmares. After Hickory concluded, 2nd Battalion, 9th Marines with tanks, and was sent on a spoiling attack into the DMZ itself. But the terrain turned hostile. Mountains, heavy jungle. The tracked vehicles became roadbound, restricted to the few roads that existed. The NVA knew where the roads were, mines, ambushes. The Ontos that had been so effective in open terrain became a liability in mountainous jungle. The weapon had limits. The Marines were learning them through blood. August 21st, 1967. Route 9 between Quezon and Cao, Quang Tri Province. 2 Ontos from a company, 3rd Anti-Tank Battalion provided security for a convoy running supplies between the bases, a light section, 2 vehicles, 6 crew members total. Approximately 2 North Vietnamese Army battalions, 1,000 fighters, maybe more, hit the convoy in a coordinated ambush. Heavy weapons, mortars, small arms fire from both sides of the road. The kind of firepower that should have destroyed the convoy in minutes. The 2 Ontos responded, 6 106mm HP rounds per vehicle. Canister, Beehive, 57,600 flechettes from just 2 vehicles, plus 30 caliber machine gun fire. The NVA assault broke. 6 confirmed enemy killed, 10 probable, 1 prisoner of war, 2 vehicles, 12 main gun rounds. They held off a multi-battalion ambush. The tactical logic was simple. The Ontos didn't need accuracy. It needed volume. 57,000 steel darts created a kill zone the enemy couldn't cross. Trying to assault through that storm of flechettes was suicide. The NVA learned they broke contact. January through April 1968. Kisan Combat Base, Quang Province. 6,000 Marines faced approximately 20,000 NVA from the 304th and 325th Divisions. The Siege of Kazan. 77 days under constant bombardment. The NVA occupied the high ground. They rained artillery and mortar fire on the base. The Marines waited for the ground assault that military intelligence said was coming. A human wave attack, massed infantry charging the perimeter. It would be Dien Bien Phu in reverse. The battle where the Viet Minh had overrun a French fortress in 1954. Colonel David E. Lunes commanded the 26th Marines at Kazan. He positioned 10 M50 Ontos around the defensive perimeter. The Ontos were airlifted into Kazan by CH-53C Stallion helicopters. Heavy lift birds carrying 9 Tonon vehicles into a base under siege. The platoon hid by day, moved into fighting positions at night. During perimeter patrols, they towed improvised sleds to resupply Marines in outlying positions too exposed for men to reach on foot. The Ontos stood ready, loaded with Beehive rounds, waiting for the assault that would come in waves of human flesh against Marine positions. 57,000 flechettes per vehicle, 10 vehicles on the perimeter. If the NVA came in mass, the Ontos would turn the wire into an abattoir. The ground assault never came. The NVA shelled Kaisan for 77 days, but never launched the human wave attack. Historians debate why the NVA failed to capture the high ground around Hill 881, South and Hill 861, which limited their artillery effectiveness. Marine air power dominated, and maybe the NVA commanders knew what tins loaded with Beehive rounds would do to mass infantry in the open. Captain Dale Dye witnessed K Sunday. He wrote, "Totally impressed with the Ontos in Hugh, and later when 10 of them were airlifted by CH-53 helos into perimeter defenses at Kazan." Colonel Lunes received the Navy Cross for the defense of Kazan. On May 23, 1968, President Lyndon Johnson presented him with the Presidential Unit Citation for the 26th Marines. The Ontos were part of that defense. 10 vehicles that deterred an army. By early 1968, NVA forces across ILR had learned to fear the Ontos. The backblast signature was unmistakable. The Beehive round's buzzing sound became a weapon in itself, psychological. The sound meant death was coming in numbers too large to comprehend. But the most telling enemy reaction came at Hughes City, where the Marines would fight for 26 days to retake the ancient capital, where the Ontos would become a legend. January 31st through March 2nd, 1968. Hughes City, Thu Thien Province, the cultural and intellectual capital of Vietnam. Population 140,000. Home to the Imperial Palace and the 18th century wall citadel. During the Tet Offensive, 8 battalions of NVA infantry, 8 to 10,000 fighters, seized the city. The 4th NVA Regiment took the south side, the modern city called New Hue. The 6th NVA Regiment occupied the Citadel on the north bank of the Perfume River. The Marines had not trained for urban combat since Seoul in 1950. They had no current doctrine for military operations on urbanized terrain. The thick colonial-era masonry made Hue unlike any fighting they had encountered in Vietnam. This was fortress warfare, medieval siege combat with modern weapons. Lieutenant Colonel Ernest C. Cheatham Jr., commander of 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines, arrived at Phu Bai on February 2nd. Before entering Hue, he did something most officers wouldn't think to do. He went to the base library. He found 2 field manuals. Combat in built-up areas, assault on a fortified position. He studied them. One lesson stood out. Stay off the streets. Blow holes through the walls. February 3rd through 5th, Cheatham entered Hue with Colonel Stanley S. Hughes, commander of 1st Marine Regiment and overall Marine commander for the battle. Cheatham took his battalion south from Hue University toward the provincial headquarters. His Marines tried advancing through the streets. The NVA turned those streets into kill zones. Crossfire from windows, RPGs from doorways, machine guns from rooftops. Men died trying to force doors under fire. Cheatham developed a new method. Revolutionary for the Marines, simple in execution. Ontos and tanks blast holes in building walls. Infantry enters through the holes instead of through the street. No more exposing men to crossfire in doorways. Breach the wall, clear the building from inside. The Ontos proved ideal for this work. At 9 tons, they could navigate terrain where 50-ton patents couldn't. Narrow alleyways, weak bridges that would collapse under a patent's weight. The cramped streets of Hughes' ancient neighborhoods. The Ontos fit at 300 to 500 yards range. The 106mm H rounds, high explosive plastic, also called HESH, punched 4 square meter holes in exterior walls or demolished them entirely. The Marines would mark a target. The Ontos would fire. The wall would vanish. The infantry would pour through the breach. Captain Ron Christmas commanded Company H, 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines. He had led the first convoy into Hughes on February 2nd with 2 providing direct fire support. Now his company was grinding through the southern city, building by building. The Ontos became his primary breaching tool. Captain Dale Dye was there, a Marine officer, eyewitness to the urban combat. Decades later, he would found Warriors Incorporated, Hollywood's premier military consultancy. But in February 1968, he was a lieutenant watching the Ontos at work. He watched Lieutenant Colonel Cheatham personally ground guide an Ontos to the riverbank. The Citadel walls on the north side of the Perfume River were providing flanking fire on Cheatham's Marines. Cheatham stood exposed, pointed at a spot on the wall. 2 spotter rounds from the .50 caliber bat rifles. Puffs of white smoke marked the impact point. Then ripple fire from a pair of 106mm rifles. A large chunk of wall fell into the moat. The harassing fire ceased permanently. Dye would write, I distinctly recall watching from deep cover as Lieutenant Colonel Ernie Cheatham Grounge guided an Ontos right up to the riverbank. A battalion commander personally directing vehicle fire exposed to enemy observation and fire. That was leadership. And then there was the loader, the PFC from Kansas. Dale Dye never recorded his name, but he recorded what the man did. One of the bravest guys I ever saw in combat was a skinny little PFC from Kansas. He was the loader on Ontos. And several times in the fighting for Hughes City during Tet 68, I saw him bolt out of his cubby hole in the back of that vehicle, ignoring incoming rounds pinging off the armor to calmly reload 1 or more of the recoilless rifles. Each 106mm round weighed 38 pounds. The loader had to dismount completely, exposed, stand behind the vehicle where the backblast would sweep the street. Lift each round, load it into the breech, lock it, move to the next rifle. Incoming rounds hitting the thin armor, the distinctive ping of bullets striking steel. The loader kept working. Dye wrote, he was grinning all the time like some carne running the grift on rubes at a low-rent county fair shooting gallery. Grinning while reloading under fire. That was the dark humor of combat. The only way to stay sane. February 6th, Cheatham personally directed Ontos fire from an exposed position during the assault on the provincial headquarters. The 4th NVA Regiment had been using the building as its command post. A B-40 rocket hit Ontos before it could fire. The vehicle was disabled. The crew survived. The next day, another was knocked out supporting 1st Battalion, 1st Marines. The driver was killed. The crew bailed out under fire, but the provincial headquarters fell. 5 hours of close combat, Ontos blasting breaches. Infantry clearing rooms after the headquarters was taken. Organized resistance in southern Hughes collapsed. The 4th NVA Regiment's command structure was shattered. February 10th, the southern sector was secured. Cost 38 Marines dead, 320 wounded. Mid-February, the Marines crossed the Perfume River to assault the Citadel. Commanders ensured that every landing craft fing Marines to the north bank carried all available onto. The fighting in the Citadel would be worse than anything in the southern city. Inside the Citadel, the narrow streets and fortress walls made tank maneuvering nearly impossible. The Ontos' smaller size proved critical. They could navigate where patents couldn't. They became the primary direct fire support weapon. Delta Company, 1st Battalion, 5th Marines, was pinned at an intersection. An entire NVA platoon was fortified in a 2-story building. Multiple machine guns, RPGs. The Marines couldn't advance. They couldn't retreat. They were stuck getting murdered. Ontos rolled up. The crew traversed the guns toward the building. 150 caliber tracer from a spotting rifle flew through a second-story window. The white puff of smoke appeared where the tracer struck the interior wall. The NVA abandoned the building, scattered through rear exits, fled the position. The Ontos never fired its 106mm rifles. The spotting round alone was enough. Word had spread among NVA survivors from the fighting in southern Hughes. When the thing rolls up on your position, it's time to leave. They had seen what 6 main guns could do to fortified positions. They had heard the buzzing of Beehive rounds. They had watched comrades disappear under waves of steel flechettes. When that spotting round hit, they knew what was coming next, and they chose survival. February 25th, the Citadel was cleared. The battle for Hughes ended March 2nd when the South Vietnamese flag was raised over the Imperial Palace. Colonel Stanley Hughes provided the definitive assessment. If any single supporting arm is to be considered more effective than all others, it must be the 106mm recoilless rifle, especially the M50 Ontos. Lieutenant Colonel Ernest Cheatham, who was awarded the Navy Cross for his actions at Hughes, said the Ontos was as big a help as any item of gear we had that was not organic to the battalion. Marine Corps Warfighting Publication 3-35.3R, the Marine Corps' official doctrine on military operations on urbanized terrain, uses Hughes as its primary case study. The publication names the M48 a one-patent tank and the M50 Ontos as the Marines' most effective weapons during the battle. The Ontos won at Hughes, but victory had a price. The loader had to dismount and expose himself completely every time. No way around it. The rifles loaded from the rear external breech access only. The loader climbed out of his cubby hole, stood behind the vehicle where the back blast would sweep the ground, and manually loaded 38-pound rounds under fire. At Hughes, loaders worked while incoming rounds pinging off the armor. The PFC from Kansas survived. Others didn't. February 6, 1968. Hughes AB-40 rocket disabled Ontos before it could fire on the provincial headquarters. February 7th, another was knocked out supporting 1st Battalion, 1st Marines. The driver was killed. The crew bailed out. The armor was 13mm on the hull, 6.5mm on the underside, 3/16 of an inch. RPGs could penetrate. Recoilless rifles could penetrate. Anti-tank mines exploiting the thin underside could destroy the vehicle completely. The Ontos survived by shooting first and displacing. When it took fire, the crew was in trouble. 18 rounds total, 6 loaded, 12 in internal racks. 6 gun salvos exhausted ammunition rapidly. Sustained combat required constant resupply runs. Resupply meant exposing the loader again and again. Operation Hickory in May 1967 proved terrain could neutralize the Ontos. In the mountainous, heavily jungled DMZ areas, tracked vehicles became roadbound, stuck on the few existing roads. The NVA knew where those roads were. The Ontos that had been so effective in rice paddies and urban terrain became a liability in certain environments. The back blast swept streets clean. Dust, rocks, loose debris, all of it became shrapnel to anyone nearby. Marines learned to take cover when Ontos prepared to fire. The weapon was dangerous in a 360 degrees radius. The concussive blast of 6 106mm recoilless rifles firing simultaneously caused permanent hearing damage, especially in confined urban spaces where the blast waves reflected off walls. Many Ontos crews suffered hearing loss that would last the rest of their lives. The cramped interior meant crews were confined in a metal box under fire or exposed while reloading. Neither option was good. The psychological weight of the Beehive round was real. Crews knew what 57,000 flechettes did to human bodies. Captain Dale Dye noted the loader grinning all the time. That grin was dark humor, coping mechanism, the human mind protecting itself from what it was being asked to do. There was no military occupational specialty for Ontos crews. They were riflemen pulled from infantry battalions, trained on the job. No institutional expertise, no systematic preservation of lessons learned. When the Ontos was retired, the knowledge disappeared. Lance Corporal Randall Browning, a company, 3rd Anti-Tank Battalion, was seriously wounded during operations. He repulsed NVA charges with various weapons. He prevented the overrun of his position, saved fellow Marines. The thin armor meant that when you were hit, you were really hit. Myths grew around the weapon, that it was a tank. It wasn't. It was a tank destroyer with armor so thin that heavy machine gun fire could penetrate the underside, that it was effective in all terrain. It wasn't. Mountains and heavy jungle made it roadbound and vulnerable, that the 6-gun salvo was always used. It wasn't. Ammunition scarcity and tactical discipline meant most engagements used 1 or 2 guns, not all 6. The enemy adapted RPGs targeting the thin armor anti-tank mines, engaging the Ontos from multiple directions simultaneously, using the external reload window as an opportunity to fire on the exposed loader. By March 1969, most Ontos were worn out, treads exhausted, spare parts non-existent, engines failing. The weapon that saved Hughes was falling apart. The Marines began removing them from service. By 1970, they were gone entirely. The Ontos has no direct modern successor. The concept, massing multiple recoilless rifles on a light chassis, was never replicated. Removed from Marine service between 1969 and 70. The remaining vehicles were handed to an Army Light Infantry Brigade, used until the parts ran out. The Army stripped the turrets and used the hulls as fixed fortifications. By 1970, Altos were removed from service entirely. Most were returned to the United States and cut up for scrap. Some chassis were sold to construction companies. Collectors later acquired a few for restoration. You can see surviving examples today. Camp Pendleton Mechanized Museum in California has an M50A1 that fought at Hughes. The National Museum of the Marine Corps. Fort Sill Artillery Museum in Oklahoma. The National Museum of Military Vehicles in Du Bois, Wyoming. Private collections and smaller museums. Fewer than a dozen survive. But the legacy isn't in the vehicle, it's in the doctrine. Marine Corps Warfighting Publication 3 to 35.3 uses Hughes as its primary case study for military operations on urbanized terrain. The Ontos Infantry Symbiosis Armor Blasting Entry Points Infantry following through the breach became foundational MU doctrine. The lesson endured even after the weapon was scrapped. That tactical innovation would resurface decades later. Fallujah in 2004, Mosul in 2016 and 17. Urban warfare never went away. The Marines just forgot they had already solved some of the problems. Nicholas Warr served with 1st Battalion, 5th Marines at Hughes. He wrote the book Phase Line Green about the battle. He recorded that Marine infantrymen greeted each salvo with cheers of "Get some." The grunts loved the weapon. It saved their lives. Michael Scudder, historian with the veterans of 1st Anti-Tank Battalion, compiled the institutional memory that the Marine Corps never officially preserved. He wrote, Ontos crews were pulled from the Marine infantry battalions to learn the trades of gunners, radio men, mechanics, and tacticians. Some crewmen were motor transport or track maintenance trained, but most were more likely to be former riflemen. No formal training pipeline, no MOS, the lessons learned in blood and forgotten by design. Captain Colin Casey commanded a company, 1st Tank Battalion at Hughes. He worked alongside the Ontos. He said, the Ontos was primarily used as a backup for the tank. While they had great firepower, their armor was thin and could be penetrated quite easily by the NVA's weapons. So, the Ontos was best employed by protecting them. It was primarily a building buster. Building buster. Wall breacher. The weapon that won Hughes. What the veterans remember is sensory. The sound of 6 106mm rifles firing simultaneously. The deeper note than a tank gun. The back blast sweeping streets clean. The buzzing of 57,000 flechettes in flight, like a swarm. Like the air itself turning hostile. The white puff of smoke from a spotting round. And the enemy running. Captain Dale Dye remembers the grinning PFC from Kansas, reloading under fire, bolting out of his cubby hole, ignoring the incoming rounds, working with mechanical precision while bullets pinged off the armor, grinning like it was all some kind of joke. That unnamed loader, he represents all of them. All the riflemen who were handed the keys to a weapon the Army had rejected and told to figure it out. They did. Delta Company, 1st Battalion, 5th Marines, Citadel intersection. February 1968. An entire NVA platoon fortified in a 2-story building. Multiple machine guns, RPGs, Marines pinned down, dying. No way forward, no way back. Ontos rolls forward. 9 tons of obsolete farm equipment engineering. thin armor, 6 rifles that should never have been mounted on a vehicle this light, 150 caliber tracer, 1 white puff of smoke. The enemy flees. The building empties. The Marines advance. The Ontos never fires its main guns. That spotting round wasn't mercy. It was terror made tactical. The NVA had learned what 6 106mm rifles could do to a fortified position. They had seen the walls collapse at Hughes. They had heard the Beehive rounds, the buzzing. They had watched comrades torn apart by waves of steel darts. 57,600 flechettes erasing everything in the kill zone. When that spotting round hit, they knew. They knew what was coming next, and they chose survival over courage. They ran. Colonel Stanley Hughes called the Ontos the most effective of all Marine supporting arms at Hughes. Lieutenant Colonel Cheatham said it was as big a help as any item of gear we had. Marine Corps doctrine memorialized it as one of 2 weapons that won the battle. By 1970, every was gone. Scrapped, stripped, sold for parts. The Marines saved the city with a weapon the Army had already thrown away. And when the battle was over, they threw it away again. What remains is not the vehicle. It's what the men who used it remember. The sound, the backblast, the grinning loader from Kansas, the enemy running, and one more thing. When the thing rolled up on your position, it was time to leave.